asked myself, when my son, at the age of 16, told me he wanted to drop out of school, he wanted to go to the mountains of Thailand to study Muay Thai with a teacher that he found online, because he'd been learning Muay Thai through YouTube videos. And his dream, he told me, was to start his own school. Was I ready? This is the world of the 21st century student. What does this say about what students are needing in order to really thrive in today's world? Can the current infrastructure really support these needs? What does it mean when the most successful and innovative companies today have workspaces that look like this, but our traditional classrooms look like this? Dr. Ken Wesson was one of our keynote speakers at Isaiah, and he was the founder of the STREAM model. And he asked, how can we focus our efforts on preparing students for occupations that have yet to be created, for a future that we have neither encountered nor envisioned in detail, and demanding the mastery of skills that we can't even imagine? His research is based on neuroscience, and he demonstrates how each of the disciplines develop vital cognitive skills. But in particular, he points to the importance of art. He says, drawing does for the brain in the daytime what sleeping does for the brain at night. The founders of the Partnership for 21st Century Learning asked, how can we bring all of this research together into an educational K-12 framework that's nationwide while building government and statewide support? The 21st Century framework supports the importance of teaching creative learning skills and preparing ourselves and our students to be lifelong learners. And these are the frameworks that are now aligned with Common Core, with the actual foreign language standards, and they've now become accepted. This is a huge step forward for arts-based teaching. But how do we put this into practice? What can we learn from Marion, also a keynote speaker at Isaiah and founder of the Artist Residency Program at CERN, the world's largest particle physics laboratory? She warns that in our product-driven world, there is a race to capture and measure creativity. And in the race to collide art and science, there is a danger of developing a cookie-cutter approach, and that art can be subjugated to science. At CERN, she pairs visiting artists with a physicist, which becomes the mentor. And her driving question is, how can we create a space where the creative process of both the artist and the scientist are valued, to keep science and art in what she calls an equal balance of wonder? This is part of the design lab at MIT. Learning Creative Learning is one of their new online courses. And the director, Mitch Resnick, he's the director of the Lifelong Kindergarten Group at the MIT Design Lab. And he asks, how can we reinstate the kindergarten approach for all learners, using the spirit of the blocks and the finger paint to engage people in creative learning experiences? And this addresses one of our greatest challenges, the limitations of the traditional classroom model. Through the Isaiah program, through the STEM Arts Project, we coordinated many artist workshops, like the ones we're going to talk about today, where students experience firsthand the artist's unique process and how they naturally integrate STEM. But for Isaiah, we decided to see how we could broaden our audience. We wanted to create an online platform where the artist's complex, intuitive, and personal experience, their unique approach, is accessible via online platforms. So we took 9 of the artists from Isaiah, and we built these design tools that allow the artists to express their views through interviews and through exchanges. Which brings me to the second part of my presentation, my workshop, Projecting Particles. It was a 2-day workshop, and it was sponsored in part by Los Alamos National Laboratory 516 and the National Hispanic Culture Center. It took place over 2 days. It was full days, Thursday and Friday. So what inspired this workshop, projection art and particle physics? In my personal work, I've always asked the question, how can I express the new reality that is emerging from the world of particle physics? Particle physics has always inspired my work, from E equals mc squared to the field theory, to the Higgs boson. I've always found a resonance with that kind of work. And I've always been looking for mediums to express it. I've always done drawing, expressed it through drawing, but when I found projection art 6 years ago through my project, the X3 project, I knew it would be the perfect medium for this exploration. X3 in particular combines projection art and data visualization. It's a little complex, and it's too complex for what I wanted to do with students. So students, I decided to go with tag tool. And so tag tool is a much more intuitive and easy to use format. It's perfect for a 2-day workshop. And I collaborated with Marcus, who's an Austrian artist, and he's a developer of the medium of tag tool. It's an app that works on your iPad. So I'd like to share the diagram that we use as a model for all workshops and for the curriculum tools. So at the center, we always ask, the learner asks, why? Why? What is my connection? My connection to the content, the connection to self or to society. To the right, the learner asks, how? How will I learn this? And this is where the teacher, the workshop leader, the artist facilitates by being sensitive to the diverse learning modalities of each student. To the top, the learner asks what? What will I need in order to learn this? Encouraging multimedia explorations. To the left, the learner asks who? Who do we go to learn this? And this is where we encourage peer-to-peer sharing, learning how to ask for help, and modeling an interdisciplinary approach. And finally, where? Where do I go to learn this or to share what I've learned? Where the learning must go beyond the classroom into the real world. So how did I apply this in my Projecting Particles workshop? I organized a variety of virtual visits. One of the most exciting was a trip to Geneva, Switzerland, to visit the Atlas Virtual Lab, which is where the detector lives that detects the particles that are happening in the Large Hadron Collider. And so they have a wonderful program that lets you tune in and have the kids talk to a physicist personally. So we had Laura Genti, a young experimental physicist. Through her very personal talk, students learned firsthand about particle physics and got to ask questions. CERN is recording and records all of the exchanges that happen, so we're going to be able to go back to this website and see the exchange. This is one of the events that were recorded. For the question why in this workshop, how to get the kids engaged, we explored the implications of these theories, from supersymmetry to extra dimensions. We imagined ourselves as particles. What would they look like, feel like? What would this room, the road, the space in between us look like if we could see the electromagnetic fields that connect us? Michael Gracier is a scientist, a theoretical physicist at Atlanta, and he actually came in personally to give his talk. He focused on field theory, and he introduced us to the father of field theory, Faraday, and he explained electromagnetic fields, which was fascinating to all of us. I always show examples from the latest video mapping projects to artists of the past. And when Michael was talking about Faraday and all of his early attempts at visualizing these electromagnetic fields, I immediately thought of Van Gogh for some reason, the way that the sun and everything connects with these little lines. And we did a lot of that in the workshop. I was always trying to do as much as possible of that, bringing in those connections. So because the goal for them was, how can I visualize? How do I get the students to look beyond just drawing a particle or drawing the Hadron Collider? It's not what I wanted to learn. That was not the goal of the workshop. The goal of the workshop was to see how these ideas could change the way they see the world, see reality, change their perspective. Students then develop their concepts through sketches, storyboards, and of course, playing with the tag tool app projected large. Here too, I would help them make connections by explaining that while scientists use mathematics to visualize, artists invent their own language in response to their medium. So with tag tool, we explored this. The previous panelist was talking about the limitations of the technology and how sometimes the technology has certain inherent qualities to it. No matter what artists use it, it kind of comes through. I have to say tag tool has that limitation. So we explored them, and for the first day of the workshop, it was good. And for the first layers, but you really have to work hard to get past that. So we looked at some of those things, and actually they were perfect for particle physics. So we looked at the transparency and the layers, for example, and I had them imagine that the layers were like different dimensions, or perhaps moving from micro to macro, you know, so that when they looked at the medium, they then approached it perhaps from a different lens. I invited my friend Linka Nauta, a Dutch installation artist who lives in Santa Fe, to share her unique approach and ideas. We use FaceTime to connect with her. Let's see if the video is going to participate. No? Well, today I'm definitely technologically incapacitated, so I doubt that's going to work, Leslie. No, I'm not getting it. But it was a little clip of her just talking to the kids. So what we did was we set up FaceTime, and the kids sat around, and she shared a little bit of her process and how she would approach particle physics and visualizing these ideas of the particle. And finally, we had a blast. It really was. It really is a great medium tag tool, and the combination of using it with projection art and with light to explore dimensions, to explore how particles interact, movement, the way you can play with the spin and the different kinds of movements allowed us to play with the way particles might be interacting right there in the space in between us. And I always try to not make it something apart, like that we're studying, but that it's happening right here, right now, in our bodies connected to each other and the way we perceive things. So we really got a chance to project onto the wall and also play with it on the iPads to get more into detail. So now I'm going to share some pictures and videos from the workshop to close up. But first I want to thank my teacher who was there with her 4 students, Amy Triller, who was amazing. She really took all these great pictures that I'm going to show you now and helped me with the kids. It's nice. This was a shot from one of the iPads. In the beginning, when the students started, they were really literal. They wanted to draw flat line with a character, and there was no dimensions, but it was just all pre-3D, just flat. So it was really interesting to challenge them to think in terms of other dimensions. And the next workshop we're going to do, Projecting Particles, is going to be in Taos on September 26th for the Paseo, our first art festival of bringing projection art and installation into the streets of Taos. Thank you very much. So now I'm going to introduce Marion. Marion is a New Mexico artist who makes icons from used computer parts with imagery influenced by Hispanic traditions. She leads workshops for schools and other groups where she shares her techniques and materials.
Joining us today. I am Marion Martinez, Circuit Board Artist. I'd like to talk a little bit of how I got started using discarded technology. When I teach or adults. In this case, I had two classes going, one with more an adult group and the other with students. I give them a little bit of information of how and why I got started with this.
Can you talk into the microphone, please?
How's that?
Better.
Okay. I began working with the circuit board in the mid-1980s. At that time, I was working with a video art piece which required some computer animation. So in the process of replacing a computer card, I discovered the circuit board in all its beauty. I began to learn more about the material I was using. I learned that the boards were made of fiberglass, that the runs were strips of metal, usually copper, nickel, silver, gold, and this is how information was being transmitted. The components of the board were varied from resistors, transformers, diodes, fuses, memory chips. Some of the components were made of glass, porcelain, ceramics, and metal. I had to learn how to cut the boards, and then what were the safety factors that I needed to consider in working with this material. Since the computer boards that I started with were rigid and not flexible, I began to look for ways to create depth and dimension. And soon I learned that overlaying the boards to create my imagery, in doing that I was able to achieve the depth that I was looking for. By the early 1900s, or no 1900s, early 1990s, I began to develop and refine techniques. I think I'm older than I am. I began developing and refining techniques in the sculpting of the circuit boards. There are approximately 24 steps in the recycling process. Usually every individual piece that makes up the entire design goes through these steps. Just to give you an idea of some of the steps, I'll sketch out a design, create a template, select the circuit board, clean the board, rough sand the board, transfer the design to the board, file, sand, steel wool, polish, wash, assemble, and that's just a quick rundown of some of the steps. I take discarded technology, I salvage finds and recraft them into imagery from my northern New Mexico culture of origin. I create sculptures, wall hanging, and jewelry from those technological parts. The creation of my work involves the deconstruction of what was once state-of-the-art technology, in many cases very expensive technology and components, which had their birth in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. At times I wonder who the true artist is, myself or the engineers that created these wonderful boards. When I began creating my work, I approach an art piece with a general concept in mind. I look at the materials I have available, then I go through the process of finding out the manner in which the materials are going to be used to create this concept. In many ways, there are similarities in the thought process from creating a work of art to examining, solving a science, technology, engineering, and math problem. When I start the process of actually putting all the parts of my art piece together, I rely on artistic creativity, and to a certain degree, I use STEM disciplines. Similar to someone working in the STEM disciplines, in creating my art, I develop templates, kind of like a blueprint, and basically to form the design, much in the same way that an architect would use a blueprint. The assemblage of my artwork needs to be exact, precise, and measured. I look to mathematics and geometry in the assemblage process of my design. And when I create works of art that move, I look at the relationship of motion between the materials I am using and the force and pull of kinetic energy. This concept was obvious in a recent workshop I had with some 8th graders. For example, some students chose disk drive that spins, has movement to it, as the base to construct their artwork. This would create movement for the art piece. They realized this is exciting to use. They recognized, though, that weight of the discards placed on the drive had a direct effect on its movement. So now they had an engineering problem to resolve. I think of my work as a bridge between my culture of origin and this 21st century contemporary art medium. The imagery of my work comes from everything I saw around me growing up in a very traditional Hispanic Catholic family, and is also rooted in a strong Native American influence of my northern New Mexico. A lot of my imagery is sacred and reflects my journey, my family's journey, my culture's journey. Just like technology has pushed us into the superhighway of fast change, my culture, once rooted in a deep tradition, is now being pushed through to transition, moving towards a transformation to what we can become in this 21st century. The use of this medium speaks to this change and beautifully displays the iconography of our culture. Some people refer to me as a modern santera, yet others ask me what the message is behind my imagery. Is it that we're worshiping technology? So everyone has a different perspective of what they're looking at. But I'm reminded of a young child's reaction to my artwork. He was about 6 years old. He ran into my booth, knowing he was looking at technology, yelled out with excitement, "Look, Mom, superheroes!" Then he stood back, looked a little closer, and somewhat puzzled and said, "No, this is Mary." Then I engaged with him and asked him if he knew what an icon was. And he said, "Yes, it's a picture on the computer. You click on it and it tells you where to go." My work elicits many different reactions, but he got it. He got it. It takes you where you need to go. I was raised in a family of farmers and ranchers with a deep respect for our earth. A very strong issue for me is that these discarded technologies are not biodegradable, and we must have a deeper respect for what we leave behind, a more creative way of repurposing our technological discards. The end result of my creative process is an artistic presentation of traditional imagery, using what technology and science created and human hands have left behind. We must come from a place of respect. We have our earth to hold on to. One of the questions I am asked the most about is, where do I get my circuit boards? Where do I get the material that I'm working with? Initially, I was purchasing decommissioned technology from the Los Alamos National Lab. Once a week, the lab would hold a salvage sale. In the early years, I purchased hundreds of pounds of technology which had become obsolete. And when I could not find parts at the Los Alamos salvage sale, I would end up at the black hole. There's Ed. Also in Los Alamos, the black hole was a gutted out Safeway, thus the name black hole, totally dark, packed up from the floor to the top, full of discards of some sort. The sizes of the boards have changed. I have been able to acquire wonderful large motherboards, mainly from the national labs. Now the boards are getting smaller. However, I'm sure I'm going to have enough in my lifetime to work with. When people become aware of the work I create, I start receiving all sorts of parts from the people. They drop the old technology off at my booth or art shows, or they will mail it to me. I remember meeting a lieutenant in the military at a Colorado Springs Museum exhibit. He was so taken and moved by my work that he said he wanted to contribute to my artistic vision. A month later, I received from him a box of circuit boards that were salvaged from the dismantling of the Scud missiles. His only message, he requested that I create something sacred from them. As you can see from all the facts here, the devastation can be totally overwhelming. There is no respect in what we're leaving behind, mountains and mountains and mounds and mounds of technology, be it from computers, from cell phones. It is important that we take responsibility and turn things around and monitor. I mean, the tons of e-waste that is out there, and then also being sent to third world countries. They have found that they have tested some of the children in these countries where the e-waste is being sent to, and they have found high traces of lead in their kidneys. Functionally, this does not work. We need to open our consciousness and develop a better way to deal with this discards. To transform it into art is just the beginning. The ability to look at situations, objects from a unique perspective is fundamental to both art and STEM. In looking at the mounds of technological discards being created every day, it presents an excellent opportunity for collaboration that are creative hybrids of the art and the sciences, an opportunity to apply artistic and creative thinking to STEM disciplines to address this situation. Applying the thought process and creating a work of art and examining solving a science, technology, engineering, or math problem could lead to some new innovations and solutions. What are the solutions? They're in all of us. I'm just but a seed, starting, I hope, a revolution. When we engage in forward thinking with a long-term perspective and where the mind is flexible and sees challenges as opportunities instead of as blocks, we can come with solutions to the issues and problems, to use technology discards in a way that has the potential to affect all citizens of the world in a more positive way. I thank you very much.
I'd like to now introduce Matt Garcia. He's from Kansas. He's a new media artist, which maintains a socially engaged practice, exploring the intersection of digital culture, place, and interdisciplinary inquiry. Growing up in the American Southwest, much of Garcia's work investigates the subjectivity of American truth, ecology, and visual culture. Garcia founded Desert Art Lab, an art-based think tank that explores how connections between desert ecology, culture, community shapes our understanding of what we are and who we are.
Thank you. I want to thank 516 for having this exhibition and symposium, National Hispanic Cultural Center for hosting a lot of our workshops, and the museum here. It's really a privilege to be able to share this work. So my work is, what I'm going to present today is based on a workshop I conducted a couple of days ago at the National Hispanic Cultural Center, exploring ecology and place. And the context of this kind of work, which we explored through the workshop, were artists like Melchin's revival fields. So are a lot of you familiar with this project? No? Okay, well then, that's great. I got a link here and I want to watch it then. I wasn't sure if it'd be redundant. Melchin is an interdisciplinary artist who works in ecology and many fields. He created this project, I believe, in Minneapolis in a I guess we call them around here brownfields, which is a toxic area in an urban space that you can't really access. Industry included a region of the city and a plot of the city, and he used this area as the context for his art project called Revival Fields.
The diversity of life has been deeply affected by industry. The diversity of life has been deeply affected by industry. The smelting of metals, such as zinc, cadmium, lead, and copper, produces particulates, sometimes invisible to the eye, which contaminate the environment. These metal particulates weaken and destroy many forms of life.
I'm going to let it load here.
Long after the smelting is complete, pollution remains in the soil. There have been no viable solutions to this problem until the Revival Field project, which proved an existing theory. Special plants, called hyperaccumulators, are introduced into the barren landscape. The metal in the soil would kill most plants, but the hyperaccumulators thrive, pulling the metals into their stems and shoots. When the plants mature, they are harvested. The plants are then burned in reclaiming furnaces. This process yields metal purer than high-grade ore, which can be resold. The continuation of this process cleans the soil and allows life to return to the environment. This renewed ecology is the completion of a work of art.
So Marion, he did this. Funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, he proved an existing theory, created a whole area of science around this art project. So another art group that it inspires some of the concept behind this workshop is a group called Symbiotica out of Western Australia, University of Western Australia. This is a fully operational science lab run by artists. So they're creating, for instance, one of the directors of the lab, Oren Katz, they're growing meat, they're growing skin, they're you know, it's very experimental, but this exists. So these are just kind of concepts that we explore. So my project was here in Albuquerque. So one of the process we explore is place. So one of the things we start with was identifying place. We're in Albuquerque. It's in the northern edge of the Chihuahua Desert. You can see it up there at the top. But it's an urban space. So and this is kind of those of you who have explored other urban desert cities, this is kind of a scene that's pretty common. You have kind of the stripped desert urban environment. And then through this workshop, we identify desert ecologies. And this right here is the cholla. Is anybody familiar with the cholla in here? Okay. It's a real tough one. It's a real tough desert plant. Very resilient. For the workshop, we also did exercises familiarizing with the desert ecology. So quick drawing exercises. Believe it or not, a lot of these students or participants, they live in the desert but have very little knowledge of the desert. So part of the workshop is identifying that dilemma. These are a couple slides from that part of the workshop. And then we go into some performance. And part of the workshop that I held at the National Hispanic Cultural Center was performing desert practice. And what we have here is we go over a planting process. So how many of you have planted a cholla? A couple of you. I know one has, because they were in the workshop a couple days ago. And of course I have. Well, it turns out a lot of people haven't. So that's part of the workshop. We go through how do you plant a cholla. Oh, it's very easy. But those things are vicious. So the hard part is getting around the spines, right? And so that's part of the process. We go over how to plant it, we do some demos on planting, and then we perform the planting process. So we perform desert practice, and part of this project is to reconnect with desert knowledge system and ecological practice. For thousands of years in the desert lands, including Albuquerque, communities lived with the desert, off the desert. And there's a rich knowledge base there that is quickly disappearing. So as we become disconnected with desert ecology, as we tear desert ecology out, knowledge systems they go with it. So part of our practice is how do we re-engage in that conversation? Through practice. So it was on a stage at the National Hispanic Cultural Center. These all become video performance pieces that will be exhibited later in the summer at the National Hispanic Cultural Center. The next step is mapping. So once we go through the couple hours of the workshop, all participants go home with their very own choya. You can see right here we're wrapping them. We have also a pair of tongs for each participant, so they don't have to grab the plant. We trained with tongs, so they are familiar with how to use these with the cactus. And the next step is going to plant it. Everybody knows of geocaching, right? Or have you heard of geocaching? Well, think of biocaching. Going out there, planting these in the urban desert space and mapping the GPS coordinates to follow the growth process. And we use social media for all this stuff. So you see this tag, Desert ABQ. So social media is a big part of the process. So I think Pablo Higuera talked about that online to offline or outside to online kind of relationship. That's what I try to explore in these workshops. How can we have an online conversation while also being outside and explore our space and understand where we're at? And one of our questions is, will native ecology survive in the urban desert? So this workshop was based off past workshops, where I explored this very question through a similar process in the Phoenix area, which is the Sonoran Desert. And the distribution of cacti was done in art galleries, in public space, to the public, where then they sent back their planting performances in public space, sometimes their own yards, all done through social media. So all these images here were sent to me through some sort of social media. Which also kind of climaxed in a mass cactus planting performance in an area of the city that was, as deserts go, stripped and just dirt, and those are kind of common around these desert urban areas. This is an example of growth over a year with that past project. We used the Nobilito for this prickly pear for this project. And this plant is growing from the natural rainfall. So there's no added irrigation to this. So this is 115 degree summers. This is 7 inches of rain. This is life in the desert. Because the desert's been stripped in urban areas so much, it's hard to, sometimes you drive around the desert lands and you think, oh wow, nothing could live here, right? Well, this isn't the case. But one of the follow-ups so the results of this process won't be really available till August, when the show at the National Hispanic Cultural Center is opened, and then we will map the process. We will see what happens out there. Those of you who want to participate, I have cactus with me. So if you want to participate in this project, it's still going. So this isn't something that's over. This is our hashtag. I have some with me. There's one right there by that microphone, if anybody wants one. I might have some extra tongs too. So the idea is, how do we map this process? And most importantly, there's a knowledge system attached to these things. There's food practice. You can eat these. People have been eating these plants for thousands of years in the deserts. And so in August we'll revisit this and we'll discuss the food practice. So the harvest of these plants and the process. Of course, those of you who engage in this, it will take years. So this is a commitment, I mean, in a few months you'll get it in the ground, you'll see how it goes, but to really observe this kind of process, it'll take many cycles. But that's the process of growth in the desert lands. Thank you.
All right. Got some questions. See how this is working. Can you hear me over there?
Yes.
Okay, so like I was saying, Matt and Marion and I were throwing around questions to prepare for this forum. So we have a bunch of them here. We started a little bit late, so I'm not sure if we're still not cut off at 4:15, but we're doing really good with time. It's 5:2. So we're going to do some of these questions together and discuss some of these things, and then we're going to open it up and bring the questions out to you. So let's see. Let's start with Matt, or actually either one of you, maybe whoever wants to address this one. I talked about in the beginning about problem finding versus problem solving. So we have this question that we feel like we all kind of explore in our work. What do you understand about the process of problem finding versus problem solving? And what are some personal experiences?
Well, I can speak to my projects, specifically. I think to develop the problem, I think of place, or to identify the problem, I think of place. So this particular project is placed in the deserts of the Southwest, and I don't think you need an expert. You need to be an expert to realize there's major ecological issues in the deserts of the Southwest. You have extreme limits of water. You have urban ecological decay and collapse in a lot of cases. So the problem is very clear when place-based. So yeah.
And when you work with your students, I mean, for me, I'm such a problem-solving kind of person, and one of the things that I think has been a real influence for me on this 21st century thinking that we're realizing is important to change our way of thinking about it. We don't always have the answers, like you were saying. We were talking about how nowadays things are changing so fast that you can't have the answer all the time. You have to constantly be asking questions. So how do we teach that process, with our students? I was wondering, Marion, if you have that way, how do you teach that kind of questioning process so that the teacher doesn't have to have the answer all the time, and we don't have to have the answer all the time. We need to know how to search.
Yeah, I think there is an overall lack of awareness of what we do when our cell phone breaks down. It's like, okay, I'll throw it away and I'll get another one. And to bring up the question of where does it go from the garbage can. Okay, have you ever planted a cell phone? What sprouts from a cell phone? Well, nothing. How many years will it take to biodegrade? Well, probably it wouldn't. Somehow at the very base level to start asking the question, what are we doing with our technology? Tons, billions of e-waste out there that we consciously have to reuse. And by consciously, I mean it's not just one person's effort. Like I said earlier, I'm just a little seed planting this idea of using it as art, but I teach it also. It's like, go out there and reclaim what you're throwing away and do something spectacular with it, and that's the whole idea of motivation, actually.
The other big question that is being thrown around a lot now is the issue of lifelong learners, that we've all become lifelong learners now. And how do we prepare ourselves and our students for what's called lifelong learning now? Any of you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, as educators, that's a major challenge. I think we have, major curriculum and model adjustments that are necessary to promote this idea that, in school you learn how to learn and not necessarily particular facts that then will carry through. It's a process of learning new ways to learn, and it'll continue when you leave the institutions, whether it's college or high school, higher ed.
Part of what I've seen being based once again in culture is that we learn from our environment. A lot of the teachings that I experienced came from all of the art I was raised around. You go into a very old church and there's art, it bleeds art. You know? It's like something, once again, we become unconscious of in looking at our environment and our families and the buildings we go into. We can learn. It's a kind of not a formal education, but it's that belonging, that sense of identity that is totally connected to who and what we're about, that has to be redefined and embraced by especially our youth today.
I mentioned that in the beginning of my presentation about how the 21st century, like what is it like, you know, the fact that everything is not like it used to be, where you used to get a job and you knew that if you got your education, you did your 4 years, when you graduated, you knew what you were going to do, and it's not like that anymore. So one of the questions that we were talking about is how this whole question about STEM and arts is a push, you know, to develop STEM skills, because of course science and technology is in everything right now. But what about the art, you know, and what are the unique qualities of being an artist and the art skills, and how are they different from the unique qualities of being strong in, say, science and engineering? And so one of the questions that I'd like to put out there, and also when we finish, we can put this out to you, these questions to you, and you can elaborate on them. But how do you feel that your art education and your particular art process equips you for the 21st century? Or like we're all more art-based. I don't know, did you have a science background? Or no background?
No,
Art background. How do you feel that your art education and your art process background equips you for the 21st century, you know, compared to someone who's coming from a science background?
I think I kind of answered that in terms I gathered from an informal environment, and that was my environment, and that's kind of my training ground, I think. And how does that prepare me? I've always been intrigued, always, with technology. From a little child, maybe 6 years old, a television broke down, and I thought, okay, I took the back off of it, and I said, oh, this tube is burnt, and it's number blah, blah, blah. So I went to the garage, took off the back of another television, pulled that tube, and went over, and it's like, oh, this is how it works now. So that fascination to see how the electrical energy of technology moves has always intrigued me. But once again, no formal education. It's from my environment.
I think there's been, in the last year or so, there's been some really interesting statements that have been made by people like the CEO of Google, who, you know, he said that really what's one of the biggest threat for jobs to the middle class is automation, it's computers. And I think the arts allows a creativity that maybe can't be automated, you know? And so I think, you know, these are, having a creative discovery, curiosity-based curriculum in education can really, you know, help the institution and the students.
Yeah, I think for myself, I think it ties back to that whole idea of change. You know, how you best prepare for change. If this is the world we're living in right now, then having the ability to respond, to be flexible, to adapt. Like one of the first quotes that you saw that came up on my slide, you know, the capacity to know now is more important than what you know, because knowledge is being just overridden with new knowledge constantly, and so you can't keep it all in your head because it doesn't do any good anymore. So it's about being able to respond and adapt, and artists have a very unique way of approaching the not knowingness. And which leads me to the next question, which is, so if we know, or at least if most of us know, or some of us believe that art does have these very important characteristics and qualities, then why is it that arts has been reduced in value in society, and consequently within education, and in particular in relation to STEM fields? It's one of the issues that I think Ariana Kirk has been an inspiration for me, because in her artist in residency program, she really focuses on that, on making sure that when she brings artists and scientists together, that it's on an equal level, and that means that the artist process, not just their work, oh, that's a beautiful piece, but their way of getting to that piece is not the same way as the scientist or the engineer gets to that piece. And the artist process is very subjective, it's very personal, it's messy, it's sometimes ego-driven, it has all these different qualities, but it has its own value and place, and it gets to the same place of trying to explore why we're here, what we're doing here, and about society and so forth. So my question is, why do you think, and of course these are just questions, right? I'm not asking you guys to have answers, but just wanted to know what your views are on why you think art has been reduced in value, and what do you think needs to happen in order to change this dynamic, especially now in light of the whole 21st century, and focus is coming back to being on creativity, but what do you think needs to happen at this point? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I'm not sure, but I think things like Symbiotica, that lab in Western Australia, things like that set a model that's really incredible. Artists are, I've been to a couple talks by Oren Katz, and he said that when they showed up to the lab, the formal scientists thought, oh wow, we're going to have some artists making our posters for us. And then within a few years, they realized, oh wow, they're growing meats, they're growing skin, they're whoa, and so I think groups like that really change the perspective of what art can be. And so I think making sure that we connect with groups like that and just find allies who are doing things like this and really changing the way we think about what the importance of art can be in science.
Yeah. Okay, and then so all of this really, the STEM Arts Education Forum is kind of focused on how STEM arts can possibly change the way things are in education. So some of our big challenges, well, there are many big challenges, but one of them is standardized tests, and the fact that this really locks teachers and schools in. And it's one of the things I think we encounter a lot. We're trying to bring creative solutions into the schools, and we get excited teachers, and but then they're blocked, because many things. Standardized tests is just one of them. The other thing is the silos, the fact that you've got the math over here, and you've got engineering, and then you got not even engineering, you got math, you got science, you got language arts, and there's not a lot of room for interdisciplinary. So I think the biggest challenge is how to bring this into the schools and how to get the kids access to all these great things that are happening. They're happening a lot in workshop situations outside of the school and not in the school. So, and I'm just putting this out there because it's been my experience that's been one of my biggest obstacles in the STEM Arts project, and trying to really get it to get into the schools and have more impact within the schools, is that block of, they're in that 45-minute time block, they've got standardized tests, the teachers are up here, and there's just no time room for that interplay. So first of all, I was just wondering if you have experienced the same thing, and what you've done maybe to counter that or to find solutions to that.
What I have seen is that in most situations there's an organization that supports the arts that has a relationship with the schools, and then they plug me in to a training program at the schools. I'm not really working within the schools or the teachers or the standardized testing. I don't have a lot of impact there, but when I do is I'm able to go in via a training program. Again, it's very structured, the 45 minutes, but it makes such an impact that then if there is an art program, they will continue this assemblage artwork or recycling technology, and that's, from my experience, the way I've gotten into the school systems.
Well, I'm a big supporter of public pedagogy. If the institution isn't doing what it should, then we should do it anyway. Go to the people. I worked on a project through the Desert Art Lab Collaborative where we made, because we weren't having the best of luck reaching some of the communities for many reasons, politics, immigration, these kind of things, we made a mobile studio. So it was a bicycle where we could go out into the community and have the discussions and the trainings in informal space, in public space. And I mean, we got a lot done in, you know, hours and days that we probably wouldn't have been able to do through traditional institutional process.
Okay, those were our questions, and so now we're going to open it up to you. You can either contribute to that dialogue or come up with a totally different question. Tom?
Agnes, I really love this conversation about process. And I come from architectural education background. I went through design school. And they said, like you're saying, subjective art process is very subjective. But each of us does have a process as an artist. And we learn to respect that. And that's what we're taught in school. Honor your own process, document your process. If I was to present an architectural final project and I didn't show all the steps I got to that point, I don't care if I did the greatest new building, it would be rejected because I hadn't shared my process. And later when I got into technology, computers, and software development, I shared some of that process, understanding. I said, wow, that's incredible. You guys have a design process. If you go to sit down to design code, what's your process? Does anybody teach that? No. But they teach design process for art. And so all of a sudden, now I'm sharing my design process with coders and technologists. And they're saying, oh, wow, I could really use that.
So you're saying you're finding an exchange more of an openness. You're saying there's a shift. You're seeing a shift. You're saying it's always been that way.
I think the arts has more of a handle on the process than the technologists and the engineers. The supposed who have a very formal process. It's really not. There's not a lot of formal process around their design.
Thank you. Yes?
I guess to elaborate on that point, you're kind of emphasizing that there's a difference between the two, but I think there's actually a lot of similarity between the two. And I think it's this false dichotomy that's been propagated that causes these differences of opinion, differences in valuation, and things like that. I think if there was better communication, you would find that the creative process on both sides is really quite similar, and that both sides could, through communication, not only determine that, but learn from each other in how to enhance both sides. And so from that standpoint, in other words, it's not that we need to incorporate art, it's that we need to understand how art is already there, so it would be, I don't want to say incorporated curriculum, but be put there as part of the creative process and illustrate creativity in all its manifestations.
Thank you. Yes, right in front.
Yeah, I wanted to second that. I mean, I'm director of the UN Art Museum. I've been the museum director for a long time, but I have a degree in theoretical mathematics. And, you know, I was one of those people interested in all of that. And, you know, that is not that uncommon. And again, I think the whole STEM thing is an incredibly oppressive form of late capitalism in which they want to take the American worker, the American student, and map it onto a shrinking dominion of workers. Because as we know that, you know, Buckminster Fuller, you know, predicted and theorized that the big challenge for our world would be how to use our time as there's a shrinking need for a workforce, right? How to use our humanity productively outside of the construct of capitalist work. And again, so the idea of inquiry is at the fundamental core of the liberal arts and sciences as we know education. But this STEM idea is that we're somehow losing ground in the global economy against Asia and other places, in which people are willing to take very low-paying jobs, in the techno economies. And again, there's some truth that we have to be part of that. But I really like that Garcia's take on it, because again, we have some other projects here. And again, cores of that project are indeed through science and through art and many of them modalities.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Yes?
Well, it just seems so obvious that, as we progress as a culture, multidisciplinary efforts are the prevalent way that we are going to improve our situation. You look at companies like IDEO in San Francisco, or the company you mentioned in Australia, Symposium. It's all about mixing up the collective, if you will, and sharing your knowledge. I am in the design industry, and the design industry and the scientific industry are now really melding their languages as well as the art community. So, we're all kind of coming
Yes, it is.
into this wonderful weave of interactivity, but there is still the silos, still the ways of protecting our own self-identities that are, not allowing us to go further quicker.
I am in agreement. I'm very positive about it. Like, for example, what I mentioned about the 21st century framework, when they first came out, so the 21st century framework is actually very interdisciplinary. And, they were very controversial when they first came out. The National Science Foundation was against it, and there was a lot of against. And it was only recently, I think last year, that they finally became integrated into the Common Core. And now they're becoming integrated into all of them. These are just little signs of change, because those are entities that really represent integration and not these silos like the STEM silo. I mean, there's always the response to STEM, thank God, like for example, STREAM, Ken's model, which even brings, in addition to the art, brings the reading and the literacy. And his perspective is interesting because he approaches it from neuroscience, from a cognitive. His perspective is every discipline has its own, develops its own very vital cognitive skills. And art is one of the most important. So he really is, the STREAM model is about interdisciplinary, not about silos. So I think there's always been a pushing back against that STEM ever since it came out. And that's why STEM arts and STEAM and STREAM and BEAM and LEAP. Any more questions? Andrew?
Well, I think going back to your question about why art seems to be devalued in educational systems has been sort of danced around by a variety of different responders to people's comments. But I think one of the major problems is that contemporary society looks at art as a finished product, as a thing that is marketable, that can enter into the capitalist stream, as something that has innate value or nothing, no value, as opposed to thinking about the process that goes into making that art, which is the core thing that we all understand. That's where the problems are solved. That's where the artist is confronting the unknown and coming up with a solution for a problem that maybe didn't need to exist, but they invented it and they solved that problem. That, I think, is one of the major core issues that we've all got to talk about. That art is not just about making something that's decorative and matches your couch or doesn't match your couch, but it's about the process of thinking that went into making it. When you were talking about Van Gogh's Starry Night, the most important thing about that painting is what was going through his brain when he was making an image like that. What was he looking at? How was he responding to it? And that's what resonates with subsequent generations of viewers. But most people understand it simply as a decorative object, as a pretty thing that is interesting to look at. And we've got to change that paradigm, particularly with education. That I don't care if we're making more artists coming out of art schools. We're making creative thinkers if they're taught properly, problem solvers. And we don't need more painters in the world, but we need an awful lot more problem solvers, and that's what art teaches. It doesn't matter whether it's pretty.
Touche. Yes, you were next.
So I'm a degree in physics, and I'm a professional artist. And But basically, my point is that the creative art process and the creative science process are really not different at all. And it's just, but only like a small percentage of people can see something that is not there and see what's missing and find that problem that no one knows exists. And that's what scientists do. We call it hypothesis. Even artists is inspiration. And so, on the other hand, you're talking about public education. And public education is not to create, the 1.00% that's going to float to the top of creativity. Bottom line, we used to produce farmers, now we produce robots, workers, and creativity and imagination and dreams really do hinder your corporate progression. So therefore, I think that's sort of why, and even education and sciences is being diminished. It's not science versus art, science and art are being, reduced to public art. And so therefore, I think, public education and maybe dreams might not be at the moment compatible. And it was sort of cruel, but, and so when we went to the education, what do you call it? Everyone's compensating level, right? And so one would not expect top NFL football players to be forced to play down the level of the lowest student. However, if you educate everyone to the same level, that is what you're asking from everyone. So all scientists, all artists, all athletes, musicians, so yo-yo ma is not allowed to play shows, that is the ability to play at the movie of everyone else, right?
Thank you. Yes.
And so I think that's sort of why there is room for art, and art is very important, but I don't think people understand what art is for, because they have never experienced it. And the people who rise high in administration and other kind that, have inspiration because they chose the university path, which is sort of not so
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
I just want to reiterate what you said, which I think is a very important aspect to art as well as scientific education, is that the physical environment by which you put children into, where there is one person that's in front of the class and there are all these, army-like positioned desks that face that one person, creates a matrix that is balanced, that it is not a shared relationship. It doesn't share the knowledge from one participant to another. It is one person has all the answers, and there are students that are trying to absorb that knowledge. That's just not, it doesn't work in the context of the 21st century idiom that you've been talking about.
That's right, and that's the whole big thing in the 21st century framework versus the older framework, which is the student-directed versus the teacher-directed classroom. So there's of course, in theory, this is already out there, which is great because we have now the foundation, we have the support, academic support. But when you go out into the schools, like I do teacher trainings, and I was in Asia doing teacher trainings in Thailand, say the same issues are there here, same ones. So, and interestingly, the whole 21st century shift is happening all over Asia as well, which is even more radical because they've been into serious rote learning for so long. They're really into textbook rote learning. But even they have accepted this, that this needs to happen in order to survive in the new world. But when you really go into the classroom, they just have, it's all new. It's even new for me, I have to say. I mean, I was raised in that kind of classroom environment. So to make the shift, and I think the answer is like what Matt says. What Matt's doing and what these different organizations are doing is exactly that. They're creating that space